Welcome to Hardware Addicts, a proud member of the Destination Linux Network. Hardware Addicts is the podcast that focuses on the physical components that power our technology world. In this episode, we're going to cover the latest mobile flagships on the market. It's about time we touch on mobile. It's a big part of our tech lives, and we're going to get into 3 flagships that you may be interested in buying. We're going to touch on the features we want to see on mobile devices in the future. And then Wendy will talk to us in the Camera Corner segment about choosing the right lens for the job. All this and more is coming up, so sit back, relax, and plug in, because Hardware Addicts starts now. I'm Ryan, your tech guide through the universe, and with me today are 2 of my favorite people in the world. Wendy, our resident photographer extraordinaire and hardware enthusiast, along with Michael, the software sage and hardware Padawan. This week, we're going to change things up. Normally, Michael and I would take a turn talking about our tech adventures of the week, but Wendy got us drooling this week by sending some pictures to Telegram of a computer that she's building. So this week, I'm turning it straight over to you, Wendy. Nobody cares what Michael and I have been working on when you've got a brand new computer build going on. That's what this show's about. So tell us what you've been up to.
Well, it's not a full-on computer build. Most of it's the same internal hardware I've had, but my case has been broken for a while, so I needed a new case. And after talking about CPU cooling again and talking about thermal paste, all of that fun stuff, I'm like, dang it. It's not only time to reapply my thermal paste, it's time to get a super awesome cooler for my CPU. So I made some purchases, and the first one was this awesome Noctua NHD15 cooler. So, it's the beast, but it's so pretty because it's all in black. Oh my goodness.
Yes. So we got some feedback on the show when I was talking about Noctua and the fact that, that a lot of them are pretty ugly, the brown color, but they're such a good cooler. You just like whatever, and it doesn't have RGB. So there's that. But some people were commenting, but there's this black edition out there, and you got one.
Yes.
And it is so beautiful.
Oh man, awesome. It is. So I made sure that when I bought this new case, because, mine was broken. It was the power button on it. So the cord has been sticking out of my system so you can turn it on and off. Yeah, it's not very pretty. In consideration of buying this case, I was making sure that it was going to be big enough for this massive cooler I was buying. But what I didn't consider in the course of buying this cooler was how small the motherboard was.
This is my favorite part, because in the pictures that you take, the fan swallows the entire motherboard. There's nothing but fan there. Yes, it does.
It eats it, the whole thing, except for, so you can put a GPU on it. Goodness sakes, that's so good that my GPU still fits. But holy moly, it does. It swallows the entire motherboard. This is a motherboard from a pre-built system that I bought.
It looks like what they call a mini ITX motherboard. Yeah.
It's not quite the same size if we're going by measurements. It's a little bit wonky, but it still fits in the system in a new case, right? Well, it fit in the last case, right? This week's been interesting. So the case that I originally bought was a DIY PC. There was a Thermaltake that I really wanted, that I really wanted, but the DIY PC one was a little bit cheaper, and I definitely spent some more on the CPU cooler. So I figured, I'll go cheaper and I'll buy this one on sale. Got it all put together, which, as I was saying before, was, I did not take into consideration the size of my motherboard, and getting power connected on the motherboard for the CPU was, let's just say, interesting.
Yeah, because there's no room for you to work left here, right? You've got, in the picture, I know we can't show this, but it's basically swallowed 75% of the motherboard right up to your PCIe slot.
And we can't show it in the podcast, but for people who want to see it, we will have it in the show notes.
There you go.
Yes.
So
we'll put it in the show notes.
The RAM, thankfully the way Noctua makes the fan is they kind of put some notches so that you can sort of get to the RAM, but the RAM's there. Did you insert the RAM before you mounted the fan, hopefully?
Yeah, I was smart enough to do that. So I
Nice.
didn't have to take the cooler back off to get my RAM in.
Very nice. Well, it still looks awesome. Is it up and running and working today?
No, actually, it's not, because the power button on that DIY PC case started sticking and I didn't even have it together for a week. And he said, nope, I'm not doing that. I had a power button that was broke. I notified where I bought it from. I've sent it back, and I went ahead and bought that thermal tape case that I wanted in the first place. It arrived today, so everything is sitting apart, and you all are lucky I am here and not putting my system back together.
I mean, that is the
ultimate
praise, really, that you're here, because when you have new geek gear out there, it's nearly impossible to do anything else. Like, I always see these pictures sometimes posted on Reddit or other places where they're like, oh, I got this equipment and I can't wait to put it together next week when I have some time. I'm like, what are you talking about? That box, from the moment it hits my porch, is just prey to me. Like, it is just a matter of seconds before I've torn it apart, gotten the components out, and start going to work. Like, I always think in my head, I'm going to clear my desk. I'm going to get all my tools out. I'm going to set. No, I just start tearing things apart because I've got to get it built. I've got to make it come alive, like, Frankenstein. So
the way I imagine it, when you see a photo on Reddit or something that says, I can't wait to get it. You're like, you took time to take a photo? What is wrong with you?
Exactly. It's like people taking pictures of their dinner or something, like, just get in there and eat it. Enjoy it. Live in the moment.
I was so worried it was going to show up while we were recording and I wouldn't even get to look at it before, but thankfully it arrived before, so I was able to get it open and pulled out and then go, dang it, I've got to go.
Well, I can't wait to get some updates on our next show to talk about how everything has come together. I think you made some great choices here. I also like the fact that you did something I notice a lot of consumers don't do today, which is when you get something and you've spent some time putting it together and you realize this isn't the right thing, it is a pain to take everything back out and send it back. But I think you made a really good choice there, because you were going to be right back where you were, square one, with a broken power button that is just annoying. And I think you're going to be much happier with thermal tape case.
I think so. It's huge. This thing is massive. So I can't wait to look at it and say, see, dear, I need a new motherboard. This one's too small.
That's right. That motherboard's looking quite wimpy right now. I think you got a good excuse to get a new motherboard in the future.
Absolutely. This episode of Hardware Addicts and the entire Destination Linux network is now sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewall, load balancers, and so much more. You can get all of this plus access to their world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month, or you can use their flexible pricing structure for as low as 0.7 cents per hour. As Ryan would say, that's darn near free. DigitalOcean also has over 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. Getting started on DigitalOcean for 2 months free with a $100 credit by going to do.co/DLN. Again, you can get started on DigitalOcean with that $100 credit by going to do.co/DLN. And we thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode.
So let's get into our core story of the week. So when we discuss hardware that powers the technology world, we cannot ignore mobile devices. In episode 5, it's important we move our attention to one of the most innovative hardware in our time. And we are experiencing the age of mobile phones. The mobile industry spits out new devices, of course, at such a quick rate, it's nearly impossible. And we'd have to rename this to Phone Addicts if we were to cover every device that comes out. But there's a couple flagships that have hit the market recently that have some really impressive specs. And I thought we would take these flagships at least and cover them in this episode, because every hardware geek cares about what phone they have on them. the first phone that's got everybody kind of got their attention. You've got a lot of YouTube videos and things coming out on this device. And because it comes from one of the leaders in the mobile phone market, which is Samsung, is the new S20 lineup. And this phone has ludicrous level specs. Beside the specs, the whole focus, including in their marketing and everything else, is primarily focused almost entirely on the camera. So I have to think, Wendy, that has some intrigue to you. I don't know if you use your mobile device at all as a camera or if you just carry around a giant DSLR everywhere you go. But I would think every once in a while you snap some pictures with a phone camera, right?
Yeah. Every once in a while I use the camera on my phone, and it's mainly for, taking a picture of something and sending it to my husband real quick or, whatever. But if it's a main family event or we're doing something, believe me, my camera's there.
There you go. So this packs a triple rear camera that starts with a 12 megapixel wide sensor that's 1.8 microns. The telephoto lens uses a 64 megapixel sensor that's 0.8 microns, and the 12 megapixel ultra wide camera as well that they somehow fit onto the back of this. Then they have the S20 Ultra, which has a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor with 1.4 microns, field of view of 120 degrees, aperture of f2.2, and packs a 64 megapixel telephoto lens with 100 times zoom. So normally when I'm reading off specs like that on a piece of hardware, it's like looking at the Matrix code in the movie. I can translate it perfectly to what it actually means. In this case, I get some of it, but maybe you can help me out here, Wendy. Is this impressive?
For me, it's not necessarily, you can talk megapixels all you want, and I don't care how many megapixels your camera has. I want to see the proof. What do the images look like? Because megapixels mean absolutely nothing to me. I want to see what the images look like.
Interesting. Did you have a chance to look at some of the things they were throwing out there in the commercials or anything? I know that doesn't matter because a lot of times they touch that stuff up.
They really tend to hype that up. I watched one video, goodness sakes, I can't remember his name right now, but he does a great job giving real world examples of the pictures, and they were fine. I think they looked great for cell phone pictures. They'd be fantastic for taking quick pictures of your kids. I strongly believe that the camera you have is the best camera, right? Because it allows you to capture stuff in the moments. But would I go out of my way to drop a phone and pick this up for the camera? Nope.
Interesting.
It didn't look that impressive to me at all as far as the results of the pictures that were taken from the camera.
So I know sensor size has a lot to do with how much light it lets in. And if you're taking pictures, I believe the sensor size, say in dark settings, that the sensor size can make a difference in that case. Is that correct?
Sensor size can help. A lot of that also comes with the technology and the software included with the sensor. So you can have a fantastic sensor, but horrible processing on the back end, and you still end up with a crappy picture.
That makes sense.
I'm not saying that Samsung on their cameras is going to have really crappy processing, but there's only so much you can do still with these very tiny sensors, and all the data you're supposed to be capturing, they really just can't get it all.
That makes sense. And I think that it can be misleading to people at times when they go and they look at DSLR out there and they say, oh, it's only 12 megapixels. That's the same megapixels as my phone camera. So I think it's interesting that you break that down, and that's not everything. Additionally, they talk about the 100 times zoom, and I was watching some footage of people utilizing the 100 times zoom, and it was so grainy you couldn't print it out or even utilize it. You couldn't even make out the face of the person they were taking a photo of. Now you may be able to get, maybe some big text like the back of a license plate or something, or get the general idea of what the photo was, but it really wouldn't be something you would use in practice. So while it has some of these cool specs, not necessarily something that's going to go out there and make you go, hey, I don't need to bring around my professional camera anymore. I have the S20.
Right. I mean, if all you have is your smartphone camera, they're definitely making better cameras, smartphone cameras. But we're no longer in the point where every time they come out with a new generation, it's leaps and bounds better. We're getting just kind of better, and we're having really big numbers to make it sound like it's fantastic, but really it's just minute.
I also think it's interesting they have big numbers where they went from 10 to 20, just jumped straight to 20.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, it's it's like Nvidia doing it too. It's like they're from 1080s to 2080s and stuff. And it's like, it's kind of interesting how these companies are like following this trend of like, oh, we can't do 11, even though there's a meme of turning it to 11 and they still can't do it.
Yeah. No. Well, and doesn't this one support, I think it's like 108 megapixels, what they're going off on one of the versions of the Samsung S20.
I haven't seen that high of a number, but I wouldn't be surprised if they threw some random weird spec in there. I know they've got the big field of view, that they're talking about, the 120 degrees that they have of view angle here. But I think if you take away the camera portion and we look at the inside of the phone, or the thing that a lot of people are interested in, you've got the choice between a 6.2 to 6.9 inch OLED display. And that's huge at 6.9 inches. That has to be one of the biggest phones they've ever released. That's,
to be honest, I love big phones.
I do too. Big phones are awesome, but it's getting to the point where you're just carrying a tablet around.
It's a phablet for sure. Yeah.
No, that's the difference between a tablet and that phone is 0.1 inch. That is a tablet.
One can make a call and one can't. So,
but it's still a tablet size. All you got to do is put like a software phone VoIP thing on there, and you're done.
Yeah.
Well,
put Discord on your tablet, and you
calls on tablets and things. But yeah, I think that they are definitely getting into the tablet range with this phone. They're going for the gamers 120 hertz, over the 60 hertz standard that we're used to seeing on phones.
That's cool.
The 60 hertz standard we're seeing on monitors. However, the 120 hertz here has to be manually set, so it's not automatically there. And it automatically reverts itself back to 60 hertz when the battery drops or gets too hot. So when the battery level drops, it gets to a certain level, like 30% or 40%. I don't know what that level is, but it's going to revert you back to 60 hertz. So it's taking a ton of power to run that screen at that size at 120 hertz, and that's going to be a little bit costly to the performance there. So it's not something you can just leave on. They do have a 1440p option, but you can't have 120 hertz when that's enabled either. So you've kind of got to make some choices of what mode you want to run this device.
It sounds like they made these possible just so they could have them on the spec sheet, because it's like they don't work together, but you can have one or the other.
Exactly. They definitely have ticked all the boxes Samsung has on anything anybody says from a spec standpoint. They have covered here, including a 64-bit octa-core processor with the Qualcomm latest Snapdragon 865 in here, which has some impressive boosts of 2.7 gigahertz. It's really an interesting processor that they've thrown out. The device can record at 8K, 24 frames per second, though, and that's really, really slow.
And it's 8K only using a small portion of the sensor. So it's going to crop you in dramatically and reduce your viewing angle when you use that 8K function.
Yep. 4K, you could do 60 frames per second. So that's a little better, but it's going to have massive battery drain in any of those modes there you're going to be dealing with. So don't expect to be taking an hour-long 4K video. It's not going to work out for you very well.
I mean, 24K or 24 frames is more like the cinematic amount of frames. So that's why they did that. But the 4K thing at 60 frames, that's actually pretty impressive. And I would, if I was going to use my phone to record something for a long period of time, like an hour or so, I would just put it on a tripod and connect it to some power and then use it that way. So the battery drain wouldn't really be a big deal.
Yeah. So
although if I was vlogging, that'd be impossible.
Let me, while all these specs are really impressive, and hats off to Samsung. I mean, they really packed a lot into a tiny device, and you can't take that away from them, even though some of these features may be a little bit fluff. They're still there, and they packed it all into one device, but you may be turned off by the price here because the base model is $999, and it goes all the way up to $1,399 for this device. It's going to be a really costly device, and that to me is a huge personal detractor. I was having a really hard time swallowing this $1,000 for a phone idea. And now that we're crossing into, closing in on 1,500 plus, some of these phones now are going over that for these flip devices and kind of specialty devices.
The Fold was like 2,000 or something already.
It's just getting insane. I mean, you're talking a full-on computer, which people say, well, your phone is a computer, but you can't do the same productivity. I can't make as much money on my phone as I can sitting in front of a computer. So to me, it makes it much more difficult at this time to really swallow the idea of near $1,500 for a device. That's insane.
If I'm dropping that much money on tech, I'm building a whole new computer and I'm building a nice one.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think it's kind of hilarious considering the smaller the phone becomes, the more expensive it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to play a game with you guys as we go through these phones. At the point where you find the phone that you're like, I would buy it. You're going to hear the price. You're going to hear the specs. I want you to shout out, take my money, so that people know where we are with these phones that we're going to go through. So is anybody at a take my money yet on Samsung already? Or are you guys going to cheat and wait till the very end?
Well,
I'm probably going to cheat and wait till the end.
Of course.
I won't cheat, but right, I will say that I will keep my money on this one.
You're going to keep your money on this one.
My husband will admit that that's not cheating. That's just how I roll. I want to know what all the options are and then think about it for a month or two. And then
well, we're not going to wait a month to get your opinion on it. You don't got a month.
Okay, I'll give you an answer today, but you're going to have to wait till we're through all the phones.
Fair enough. All right, the next one I am really excited about. Now, this one I cheated a little bit because it's not a brand new phone. It's unlike these other two that we're going to cover. This phone has actually already been out on the market for a little bit. It was released late in 2019. It's the ASUS ROG II. ROG stands for Republic of Gamers. All of us hardware geeks know about ASUS. It's a well-trusted brand in motherboards, laptops, GPUs, network devices, and now you can add phones to that list as well. The ROG comes with a Snapdragon 855, so the generation just before the 865 released. You still get the 120 hertz at a 1 millisecond response time. You get the AMOLED LED, up to 12 gigabytes of RAM, 6,000 milliamp battery, and this is the cool part. This is the part that gets me going. It comes with a ton of gaming accessories that turn this device into the equivalent of what a Nintendo Switch looks like. So you can take controllers that it has. It doesn't come with these in its initial box. You have to buy this stuff separate, but it's still cool. You have these controllers that attach to the side, just like the Switch has, that attach to the side of the screen. You've got a kit that you can get that has a dual screen twin view dock that basically turns it into, I guess the best thing I could describe it as, like a 3DS. You remember how they have the screen in the bottom and the top? So you can add a second dock to this that adds an additional screen to it. And it even has RGB lighting. I mean, come on.
Oh, I don't need any more. You got me with the RGB lighting. Take my money.
No, I think the best part about this phone is the front firing speakers.
Yes. Boom. That is such a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it is. And it's been a while since I've had a phone with front firing speakers, and I miss it. I miss it so much. So that was the thing when looking over this one. The battery is huge, and that part is awesome because, we're busy all day long. It's wonderful not to be stuck to a cord, but front facing speakers, that's the gem of this phone for me.
Can make all the difference in the world in sound. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think there's only I don't know of anything I'd want that this phone doesn't have. So the ridiculous. Okay, here's the question. The resolution that it has for that 120 hertz, can you actually use it what they claim that you can? That's the question.
Yeah, all the pictures that I've seen of this device in action and playing games have been quite impressive. The one thing that I did notice is that this particular phone, the controller accessories don't work in every game. So you spend all this money and get these great controller accessories, and then you can't use them, so you have to slide them off and then just use the touch screen because a lot of games assume you don't have a controller or things like that. Now, the dock comes in handy because, it adds kind of that dual screen. So you got one you're touching on or going through your inventory, and the other one you're watching the game on. So that works with anything. But as far as the controllers go, it's going to be hit or miss. But of course, you could always use like a Bluetooth controller like anything else as well and add that in there. Now, this is a 6.59 inch screen, so it's still a fairly big screen here. HDR display, 10-bit, absolutely gorgeous screen that you'll be quite impressed with. I don't do a lot of gaming, and we talked about that. We don't do a lot of gaming on our phones. I don't think any of us did, but
nope.
This may change my mind a little bit. Like, I would be probably a lot more apt to play a game on my phone with this thing cooking.
Really?
Yeah, because it's the Nintendo Switch experience. You've got, I feel like it's an actual game console. Every time I play games on my phones, they just end up getting so hot and the battery dies so quickly. And then the experience of trying to play with touch controls is generally there's a sacrifice. So the game will automatically run for you, for instance, and you're just pushing buttons to jump, or it has a lot of auto aiming capabilities. So I don't feel like I'm really playing a game. It's more of kind of, I don't know, a toy. But once you start adding all the controls in for the games that will play it, I think it starts, becoming a more serious game console at that point.
They've had to do some pretty heavy duty cooling on the inside of this, haven't they?
Yeah, they've done some impressive things, and the phone's probably a little thicker than most of your phones in this arena. And when I look on the back, they've got a lot of ventilation and things built into the back. Very smart layout that they have to in order to incorporate.
It's not super
all this.
thick though. It's thick, but it's not like so excessive you call it a brick or anything.
No,
like
not at all.
It looks like a normal phone. It looks like the thickness of a phone from like a few years ago, but has the power of something you don't think should even exist.
Yeah, it's 9.48 millimeters thick, or 0.37 inches. So that's pretty thick.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I actually think that this is a sick looking phone, and I've actually wanted it for a while. And there's more and more I look into it, and more I want it. But I also wanted to point out that when you put it into the dock, it also becomes a folding phone at that point. So it's got even that buzzword to it.
Nice. And you don't have to spend $3,000, $2,000 to get one. The screen is 2340 by 1080. Again, at 6.59 inches. It's got the Gorilla Glass 6. It's got blue light filters for eye care. They care about your eyes. That's how much this phone loves you. It cares about your eyes too.
Yeah, the blue light filter automatically built in. Like, that should be every device that everything should have a blue light filter, just period. Any kind of technology that has
Give us a brain filler on that for a little bit, Michael. Why does blue light filter matter for people who've never heard of the term?
Okay, well, blue light is what basically all of the LEDs that you have are normally in a blue light form. And what happens is when you have a screen in your hitting your retinas, blue light makes you feel more alert, more energetic, and more awake, because it kind of messes with your, what's the phrase?
Circadian rhythms.
Circadian rhythms. That's right. So it's messing with your circadian rhythms. And when you remove the blue light on a nighttime period, it allows you to, be more naturally focused on, like your brain will actually not be constantly hyped up. That's why if you're laying in bed and you have your phone and you're just looking at your phone, you can't go to sleep. It's because that blue light is forcing your alertness. And if you have it in a red mode, or you just dim out the blue, and most of the time when you dim out the blue, it turns into like a red tint. And if you have that red tint, you will actually go to sleep faster. And if having it like a nighttime mode on a device is so nice for anybody who like wants to work at night but doesn't want to do like energy needed tasks, but you want to do like, reading up on something or whatever that doesn't require the accurate color, then it's just a fantastic approach. And I've used it on phones, laptops, desktops, everything. And it is so much better to have it than not. And you there's no way to even like understand until you use it.
Absolutely.
Like you'll know it, but until you actually try it and feel the difference, because it doesn't seem like, the different color light's really going to affect me that bad. Yeah, it actually kind of will. And there's also, this also relates to why when you go to get a light bulb and you put a home light bulb is like an orange warm glow instead of the daylight bulbs, because those daylight bulbs are blue light and they will actually, for having them on at all times will mess with you just in the same way.
That's so interesting. And I want to take a moment and just pause and maybe give an applause for the fact that this is the first time Michael is given a brain filler on Hardware Addicts. And that's pretty cool. And you did a great job. So thank you for explaining that.
Sweet.
All right. So if you're interested in the camera on this device, 48 megapixel camera, which we learned from Wendy, don't really care what they're going to put there. 48 megapixel, 20 megapixel. It's really about...
watch the reviews and see what the images look like if you're wanting to buy a phone based on its camera.
There you go. It's got a 125 degree viewing angle for those photos. Now, there are multiple versions of this phone. So if you go on Amazon, you want to pick one up because you're not going to be able to get one through a carrier that I've found, at least here in the US. They range from between $600 to $1,700. The big difference between them is what's included with the package as well as the storage, because the $1,700 comes with a 1 terabyte of storage. 1 terabyte of storage on a phone. And
holy crap.
That's pretty insane.
This is
a terabyte of storage and a 6,000 milliamp hour battery. That's a lot to pack into that little device.
Now, before you hit buy, Wendy, because I can just feel you might be out there on Amazon right now, I got to tell you the downside to this device is it lacks 5G support. Now, for depending on where you live, some people are going to go, so what? I won't see it for the next 10 years anyways.
Yeah, it lacks 5G support. So does my area.
So does my area. So if you're somebody who's looking for 5G, obviously the Samsung S20 comes with 5G. This device does not have a 5G option. So that would be the only downside. But did I mention it has 12 gigabytes of RAM as well? 12 gigabytes. I
don't think you did, but that's another awesome, ridiculous thing.
Yeah.
This really is designed for the phone gamer.
It is.
Yeah. Or just someone who says, you know what? A phone is not enough. I need a monster in the shape of a phone.
There you go. So for me, this is without a doubt the phone that's take my money.
So you and Michael are both all in on this ASUS, huh?
I mean, it had me at the RGB stuff, but then we kept adding more and more great stuff for sure. I mean, all this stuff is fantastic. This is easily a take my money, and maybe even twice. That's just
that's a lot for you.
You'll be dual wielding versions of this phone. It's so good.
Yeah, that's how good it is. That's how impressed I am by it.
I love it. All right, so we've got one more contender up here that may make you change your position. Maybe you'll flip once you hear this. It's the Sony Xperia II. After a fairly successful launch of their first Xperia phone, they're back with 2 new versions now of Xperia. You get the Xperia 2 and the Xperia 2 Pro. Now, all of their marketing, Michael, because we got to make fun of marketing sometimes with these companies, actually call this phone the Xperia II.
What?
Isn't that ridiculous?
And the Xperia 1 II Pro. I don't know. I guess they think somehow the Xperia 1 is part of the name. It just doesn't make sense to me, but that's what I've seen in all of the marketing.
Yeah, wasn't the first edition just called Xperia and that's it?
Apparently this one's 1 II. So if you go, and it was really confusing when I was looking up the specs and information on this device, because you would see Xperia 1 and then I wouldn't recognize the 2 and I'd skip the article. I'm like, this is weird. I'm searching specifically for 2. Why does it keep showing Xperia 1s? It's because it's Xperia 1 II.
Yeah, that's weird. Super weird. But I think, this is obviously not what they're going for, because I'm just trying as a marketer, try to figure out somehow to justify this awful decision. And I'm thinking maybe it's a boxing reference to give them old 1 II.
Oh, nice. Yeah, the 1 II. It's the killer. It's the iPhone killer.
Exactly.
You're giving them the benefit of the doubt that they really don't deserve here.
Yeah, they don't. It's
right.
It's terrible.
All right, so the Xperia 2 base is pretty yawn-inducing. However, the Pro version of this phone coming out is more alluring for those who are into cameras. Specifically, the Pro camera is meant to be integrated with a DSLR camera by the fact that it has a built-in mini HDMI port. Yes. I was looking at pictures of this, and they're taking this phone and they're connecting it through a base and an attachment to their DSLR, and it allows them to actually have this huge view screen, which is pretty cool.
It's a monitor for your device, so you have a much bigger viewing window to see the picture you're taking.
How useful is something like that to you? I mean, now these DSLRs come with a pretty big monitor built in.
Okay. A secondary monitor, like a detachable monitor that can be very useful even for like, I don't do photos, but video stuff. It's definitely going to be very useful, especially you can just turn it around and look from the other direction. But you can just buy a screen for that.
That's true. The Xperia II gets a Snapdragon 865, a 90 hertz screen. So they went over the 60, didn't quite go to 120 or 144. They stuck with 90, 3.5 millimeter jack, but no 5G on US versions. At least that's the rumor right now. And that is a very head scratching decision there. I have to believe that the Pro version in these will get 5G. So don't hold me to that, but that's what some of the news was saying on this. The Snapdragon 865 packs a 1x Cortex A77, 3x Cortex A77, and 4x Cortex A55, and an Adreno 650, all in this Snapdragon, which is the same processor, by the way, that we talked about with the Samsung S20. You get 8 gigabytes of RAM, a 4,000 milliamp battery, 6.5 inch AMOLED, 4,000 milliamp battery, 3,840 by 1644, and a 12 megapixel telephoto wide and 3D time of flight lens. Yeah.
What does time of flight mean? What is a time of flight lens?
It's a 3D lens, and I have no idea.
Whatever that means.
Wendy?
It is jargon for rangefinder.
Oh, perfect.
Nice.
Marketing. Yeah.
Yes.
They're using some sort of ridiculous marketing, just like the 1 II.
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
No, you guys are completely wrong. It's a range imaging camera system that employs time of flight techniques to resolve distance between the camera and the subject for each point of the image by measuring the round trip time of an artificial light signal provided by a laser and LED. Come on, people.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah,
Wikipedia.
it's a rangefinder.
Thank you, Wikipedia. Exactly. So this is a pretty cool device for those who are pro photographers. Now, all three devices we have covered here are using this universal flash storage versus the embedded multimedia card storage. The universal flash storage delivers SSD-like speeds on mobile devices. So if you see that UFS, you know what it means, what they're talking about here. It's able to offer over 3 times faster read and write and can do this in a full duplex standard. And what that means is it can read and write simultaneously. By contrast, the embedded multimedia card technology that we've been using before can only read or write data at a specific given time, not at the same time. UFS does all this while maintaining the same power levels and needs that eMMC needs, so it's a much better technology. So you're going to see UFS a lot.
Yeah, that seems way
One
better.
thing I'd like to hit on the Sony, though, is I know it's on the software side, but they really do give you a lot of control over that cell phone camera, getting to choose your shutter speed and your ISO, all of these different manual things that you can control that some of the other phones don't. And a big bonus for me, which of course I'd pick this out since I'm a camera girl, it has a Zeiss lens. And anybody who knows cameras, Zeiss makes amazing quality glass. So them putting a high quality lens in front of their camera definitely means you're more likely to get a better image out of it.
And what Wendy has taught me so far in these episodes of Hardware Addicts is glass is everything.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. So is this a take your money?
Of the 3, yes, this one would be the take my money.
Interesting. So 2 for the ASUS ROG II and 1 for the Sony Xperia II. And I thought this one might be the one that got your attention. Now, would you use the feature where you use this as a secondary monitor?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one that I use already for video, which you guys got a little taste of earlier this week as I was playing with it and my new cooler. But it is so nice when you're working with different things to have a larger view of what you're taking a picture of sometimes, especially if it's on a tripod and your camera's not moving and you can make some slight adjustments. I'd absolutely use that feature.
Very nice.
It's definitely a cool idea. And especially considering I don't think anybody else has done that. You know, that's pretty awesome. And they do have a courage jack, so I'll give them credit for that.
There you go.
That's for those who don't know, that's the headphone jack. And, yeah, so that's really good. I think Xperia 2 is the 1 2, obviously. I think it's the secondary choice for me. Like, I think there's a lot of great things about it, and I think that the way that Sony treats the modularity and control for the user is one of the things I care about the most. But then I look at the specs of the ROG 2 and go, yeah, you win.
And I realized we weren't fair to the S20 because I didn't talk about the RAM. It too comes with a whopping 12 gigabytes of RAM standard, which is still very impressive, but only goes up to the 512 gigabytes of internal storage compared to the ROG II, which goes up to that terabyte, which is quite a difference there.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't have RGB or fold, so who cares about the S20?
By the way, the RGB on the ROG II is controllable as well, just like on a motherboard when you have the RGB lighting, so you can make it kind of flash and breathe and do all those different kind of things, which is pretty cool.
That's ridiculous.
That's all I need is another thing lighting up that I'm like, oh, what's wrong?
You know what?
You actually could use it as a value because you could set it up where I would assume, I don't know if this is how it would work, but I assume you could like make it where it would like the lights would go brighter and like shine more when you have a phone call or something, making it easier to find your phone when you have placed it on your desk.
My wife's calling me and I have it glowing red, like red alert, red alert, red alert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brian's in trouble.
Exactly. Again, he bought something he wasn't supposed to. So now that we've talked about these three devices and we've decided which ones we want to spend our money on, or theoretically would if we just had bags of cash. But of course, any of these companies feel free to send us one for free if you want us to talk about it. Yeah, no problem. Let's talk about what we think these phones are missing. Because for me, when we're getting into this price range, there's one thing that I feel like is missing terribly out of these devices. If I'm going to start spending $1,000 or more on a phone, then I need repairability and modularity. Meaning I want a base like I have with my desktop PC that allows me to pull out. Now, different phones have tried this in the past. There's been a couple versions of this and they haven't been real successful. And I think because a lot of people are not sure they're actually reliable, that they're going to continue coming out with components and things that they can upgrade. But this to me is something really important that I think consumers need to start demanding, and including, especially one thing you can do to demand it is hit up these big YouTube channels and these popular outlets that talk about these phones and put comments and things in there saying, what about repairability? What about being able to upgrade it? Because it's nobody's talking about this with any of these phones. If you go out there and look at the reviews, we've all just accepted that you're going to spend this money and you have no ability to really repair this thing on your own. I do a lot of phone repairs and they're getting more and more obnoxious as you go along. It's harder to get the glass off. It's harder to take them apart, and it's even more difficult to get them back together. They keep changing screw standards. So you got to buy special screw sets to get the screwdriver sets to get the screws out, and it's just completely obnoxious. And that's something, if you want to sell consumers, and look, these phones will probably sell no matter what I say, but if you really want to sell me on a phone like this, repairability is something I'm looking for.
And Sony seems to be pretty good on the repairability stuff. I believe they have official parts with iFixit and teardowns for fixability. So they are one of the companies that cares that way. That's one reason I purchased Motorola, is their stuff. It's easy to get authentic parts and have them fixed.
Very nice. I mean,
I
that's
think
a start.
A great point. I think the repairability is a fantastic point. And the fact that we haven't been able to open our phones and replace the battery in 5 years is a shame and just stupid. Like, we want it super small. It doesn't need to be a feather. It can be slightly thicker. It's not a big deal. Let me take off the back.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really easy, I think, for a design aspect for them to create this modular device in pieces. The camera obviously could be a modular piece in itself. The battery, naturally. Storage is an area where you could just have pieces. I believe it might have been Motorola that tried a phone like this where you would pull off different pieces, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just...
It was Motorola. They did. And it was like these little block pieces, and it was really interesting, but it was also kind of wonky and it looked weird. So it was functionally cool, but you didn't really want to use it.
Are you talking about their Z line, their Moto Z?
Yeah.
And that's actually what I use. I use their Moto Z line with the modular pieces.
That's so cool. See, maybe that's the one that should be getting our votes.
Modular pieces?
They haven't needed replace so far. And the nice thing about it is if you want, an added speaker, they've got speakers for it.
Right, but my ideal was like when I first saw them, I thought maybe you could do upgrades and get better pieces with that. Can you do that?
It doesn't actually upgrade the hardware of your phone. It's an additional piece for usability.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that particular phone you're talking about, that one has the kind of attachments for gamepad you can add onto it, similar to the ROG, but not quite as,
There was one
geeky.
phone I know, I don't remember who made it, but it was like these little it was like a puzzle piece where you could take apart, like take off of the CPU and stuff.
Yeah, I remember seeing that one, but I can't remember what it was called, like a Robin maybe?
Write us and let us know in the Telegram group, or not, maybe in the Telegram group for Destination Linux, but also in the Destination Linux discourse forums, if you remember what phone we're talking about. All of us can picture it, but I can't remember what its name was. But you're right. You had block devices you would pull off, and you could upgrade the things like memory and stuff.
Yeah.
And
that's what I was thinking of when I was talking about the Motorola one, but it definitely is not that one.
The other thing I want from phones is an easy alternate OS support. So there's a device out there called the Pine Phone, which I'm really excited about because it has a removable battery. It's all open source, very much security and privacy driven device. So it's a niche in that area, but you can put a micro SD card into this phone and boot a completely different operating system right off that micro SD. And then when you pop that micro SD out, boom, you go back to the base operating system. And a lot of people have issues with the big phone operating systems these days and are very concerned with their privacy and things. And they want an alternate OS on there for various purposes. And to me, that would be something of a feature that I would love to have seen on one of these.
Yeah, I would love that. The Pine Phone is something that looks really awesome, but I'm a big fan of that, especially considering the price is so reasonable. Like it's only $150 for those who haven't heard of it. It's a really interesting. I mean, it's not like a flagship device, but it's still pretty impressive for the price that they give you. I would love to see a flagship device that had the ability to boot from micro SD or something, so that you could have Android and then something else, and then if you needed to use Android, you could go into it, but you didn't have to at all times. That would be so fantastic. Like I think as a marketer, I do have to use Android in certain cases because some apps only require iOS or Android, and I would I have to use it in those cases. But if I could switch back and forth that easily just by rebooting the phone, that'd be amazing.
Yep.
Yeah. The Pine Phone looks absolutely great that way. Sony has a history of having their bootloader unlockable directly from the company. So I'm not sure if this version does, but they do have a history of allowing people to change the operating system on their phones.
Yep.
Wendy is making take my money slightly change now.
You might go the Xperia II, huh? You're going to give up all the RGB lights? I don't know.
It's
do it, Michael.
Torn. I'm so torn. I'm torn.
Tell me, is there anything else that we're not covering here that you would need to see on a phone or that you want to see on the phone in the future?
I think we really share a lot of the same concerns there as, is the device repairable? And can I do with my device what I'd like to do with my device? One of the biggest concerns I have with phones in general is price, and that seems to be going completely and totally out of control. I've been using quote unquote mid-range devices for a few years now, and I really don't see the need to spend $1,000, $1,400 on a phone. It just doesn't seem like it is worth it to me for that price point.
Yeah, especially when they make new releases the next year that are slightly better.
That's the good thing about going with the ASUS ROG II is that it's already been out there, and you might be able to pick it up on the used market for a much better price than the retail price, especially when some of these next gen 5G phones hit, and that's all the rage. And we're all sitting here in cities going, stupid. Yeah, it'll be 10 years.
Well, there's actually something I have that I think that it's kind of weird that durability is irrelevant to phones. And I remember a time where the old flip phones, they would show you could drive over them and it'd be fine. And now we have these things that if you slightly look at them wrong, the screen will crack. Like it is they're designed like, yes, they are like little bricks of magic. That's essentially what they feel like. But why does every phone manufacturer make the phone so weak and you just drop it one time and it is gone? Well, and they don't come with cases ever. You have to buy like every phone. Everybody gets a case. Like at least provide cases. Like
it's
I just think
actually
it's
impressive
very weird
how sturdy they are considering the materials that they make them out of. But I agree. Everybody, the first thing you do when you get a new phone, most everybody, I know there's some that are, living on the edge of the world and want to see the world burn and don't put a case on their phone. But outside of those people, the first thing I do when I get a new phone is I go buy a case and put it on there. And, it's an additional expense on top. I know, now iPhone's making their own cases and things. And people, by the way, may be saying, why haven't you guys covered the new iPhones out there? I have been in the iPhone family for a while. I like iPhones. They've been great. There's a lot of arguments I could make of why I think in a lot of cases they're better than Android from a software standpoint in certain areas. In other areas, they're weaker. But at the end of the day, the new iPhones were a complete disappointment. My wife has the latest iPhone 11. It's just the hardware on it is a disappointment. The phone itself is a disappointment. The software has been a disappointment. And Apple's frankly lost a lot of their edge that they've had in the last few years. It used to be pretty much Apple would come out with a new phone. Everybody copied everything from Apple. And yes, I've been in those arguments a million times, but I'm in the industry. Believe me, they copied Apple. And then everybody would, follow whatever Apple was going to do next. And now you're starting to see them break away from that idea of let's just keep removing stuff. The cameras and things were good on them. And some cases they'll say compared to some of these phones in the video reviews that the iPhone camera is comparable or just as good. But the overall experience on them, I think, is severely lacking compared to these Android devices. So that's why I didn't cover the iPhone here in this case in the comparison. Number one, they've been out for a long time now. And number two, they don't really have anything that matters in the market. Now, their processor that they utilize is still as fast and in some benchmarks still faster than the new Snapdragon 865. So props to Apple.
But Michael brings up a good point with how easy they are breakable. With what my husband does, he's usually working on large equipment and welding. Having things break is a serious issue for us. So yes, there has to be a case on it. We've had one week where he's broke 3 glass screen protectors inside of that week. So it is very important to, no matter what price point you get your phone, protect it, because drops, spills happen. And in our life, just the general day-to-day is rough on these electronics.
There you go. All right, Wendy, so it's time for Camera Corner. We want to learn some more about lenses, the glass. So fill our brains.
This is absolutely one of my favorite things to talk about because I love lenses. And once you start, you just can't stop. You need to have all the lenses everywhere.
Spoken like a true hardware addict.
Absolutely. So when you're sitting down to pick a lens, one of the things you want to think about is angle of view. So when you're taking that picture, how much of the landscape do you want to see? Do you want to be able to see a lot? Do you want to be able to really zoom in and just see a little bit? What is that distance you're wanting to look at? Then you need to consider how much light does that let in? And that's when we come to the f-stops or the aperture on the lens. So the smaller that number, the wider that lens opens up and the more light it can let in. So the darker situation that you can be in and still get enough light on that sensor to get a good image.
Is there too much of light? Is there such a thing as too much light?
Well, there is, because you can have an image that is completely washed out and you have no detail, or you can have an image where there's not enough light and it's too dark. So that's where you would make some other. But it's still a good question though to ask. So what if you have too much light? Then you can either step that down and close that aperture up, or you can put filters on your lenses. It depends on the look you're going for. And that comes into the third main point, which is depth of field. And that is how much is in focus and how much is blurry. the wider open that aperture is, the less is going to be in focus. And the more stopped down it is, or the smaller that aperture is, then the more that is going to be in focus. So if you're going for a look and you want a really nice blurry background and you want your subject in focus and there's too much light coming in, then that is one of those situations where you'd have to put a filter on to get the look that you're wanting.
Interesting.
So,
now, one of the problems I constantly have with pictures, taking pictures and cameras, is this light situation where I'll take a picture, maybe it's in an area of my house that's not well lit and it's all grainy and, doesn't look good. So that's where that manual control of the aperture is important that you were talking about, and lower lets in more light, not more aperture.
Yeah. So if you have a lens that has a 1.8 aperture, that means it can open up really big. And that number, there's this really funky math problem that goes along with it. So what that number means really depends on the size of the lens. So if you have a lens with a really long zoom and it can open up really wide to let a lot of light in, that lens is super heavy. There is a lot of glass in there and it's really big and really expensive.
So I just need to spend more money. Great.
Well, it could be, or you could learn how to use some of those manual functions. One of the reasons why you're getting graininess, especially if you're in auto mode, is in order to compensate for how dark it is, it's really cranking up the ISO. And ISO is how sensitive your sensor is to light. The more sensitive it is, then the more artifacts or graininess that you will get in that finished image. So there's a compensation for turning up that sensitivity.
So there's something called aperture priority mode I've seen on cameras.
Yes.
This allows you, this is where you would go into to just set aperture, and that's your only focus. You're not probably changing ISO there, or is that?
Yeah, you're not changing ISO or shutter speed. So you're focusing on what look you want. How much do you want in focus is a really good reason to use aperture only mode.
Nice. So what are some other things we should consider when looking at a lens?
Some of the things you consider is definitely, especially for people just starting out, is price. So you're most likely going to get a zoom lens. There's two different kinds of lenses. There's zoom, where it changes the focal length. And then there's a prime lens, where it's a fixed focal length. The wonderful thing about the zoom lenses is you get a chance to play with things, especially in kits that have two different lenses. One that's goes from really wide to about a 55, sometimes 75 millimeters. And then they'll have another lens that goes from 75 to maybe 200 in those zoom ranges. And that gives you the ability to really play with distance. And they're not as expensive. And they're not as expensive because as you zoom in or out, it changes how much maximum light it will let in. So if you look at those lenses, it'll have an f-stop range. The low range is when it's fully zoomed in, and the largest number is when it's fully zoomed out. So it lets you know that there is a light difference there between one setting on your lens to the maximum setting on your lens.
Very nice.
If you want a lens, like I said earlier, that will really reach out there and lets in a lot of light, you're spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on that lens. They get really expensive, and part of that is the glass on them.
Whoa. I could buy a brand new thread ripper for that. I don't know.
Yes, you absolutely could. You could buy a brand new thread ripper for that. But one thing about lenses is sharpness. So you can have the absolute highest end sensor in the whole world. You could have a Hasselblad medium format camera. So those are extremely expensive. You're looking at $35,000 to $40,000 just for the camera body alone. You can have this super expensive camera body and stick a crappy lens on it, and you'll get a crappy picture. That's all there is to it.
On a $35,000 camera.
Yep, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. It's not all about the sensor. It's about the quality of glass that you put in front of it. Because if you think about it, those lenses are taking the surrounding light, they're focusing it on that sensor. So the higher quality the glass, the higher quality the manufacturing that goes into that lens, the better the picture will come on the outside. So not everybody can go buy an extremely expensive Zeiss lens, and I don't expect everybody to. But depending on what your applications are, then you can think about, what is my image going to look like? It's definitely one of those situations where the amount of money you put into it definitely affects the overall quality of your gear. And if you can only spend so much on your total package, go down on the camera body and spend more money on the lens. You'll get more out of it overall.
That's great advice.
I do want to add, though, don't shy away from the old lenses. I am a huge fan of these old lenses. Some of them have the motors in the lens themselves. And so you have to have a camera body that can run those lenses, which most of the new ones do. And then some of them have the camera body itself is the motor. Some of them are manual. I've got quite a few lenses that are manual. So don't shy away from the older lenses. You can pick them up for really cheap. You can get adapters for your newer cameras. It's a great way to add glass, to play with things, and to just explore the world and not have to spend so much money.
Is it possible to get a really old lens for a decent price, like under $100, and it not be all damaged and stuff, like actually be a good quality thing? There's that.
You really want to pay attention if you're buying old lenses to make sure. So these are things you want to check out if you're buying older lenses. Make sure there's pictures, or you can pick up the lens and look through it. Is it clear or is it foggy? If it is, you want to turn the knobs on the lens. If you can hold it, make sure everything is gliding good. But for the most part, you can pick a lot of these up for under $100. One of my favorite micro lenses, which is a manual focus only, I got for $55. I absolutely love that lens. I have done a ton of bug photography with it. I wouldn't trade that thing for the world.
There you go. Nice. Well, thank you, Wendy, for schooling us in the world of lenses. That's it. Our 5th episode of Hardware Addicts is a wrap. Thank you all for listening to the show that brings you your bi-weekly tech fix. If you're not all lit up on tech yet, then be sure to check out all of the great content on the Destination Linux network. Head to destinationlinux.network to check out all the podcasts and YouTube partners available there. There is just a plethora of information to fill your brains with.
Remember, there's no such thing as too much hardware. Learn, build, innovate, and grow.
See you next week for another great Xperia 1-2 punch episode of Hardware Addicts.
Well done.